What's up, guys? In this video I'm going to go over some mastering techniques, a lot of go-to techniques that I use, and I used similar techniques when mastering my new track No Fap Police. Now of course you can substitute any plugins that achieve the same thing, whether it be EQ or compression, limiting. This is just going to be for reference, so you can use kind of a baseline and get an idea of what I do. Alright, so to get started, I have a mix down here, and it's peaking anywhere from like -5 to -3 dB. I'd say in the -6 to -3 dB is good starting point. You don't want it louder. Of course it could be quieter, but it's kind of a sweet spot to stay within that -6 to -3 dB range. That kind of gives you the best results. First things first, I just have a kind of snippet here, so I'll go ahead and play that back for you guys. This is what we got. And from the waveform, when we take a look, we can see there it's around -4 dB, -3. Yep. Around -5 to -4. There's some peaks in there, but that's what it's going to take care of. That's what limiting and compressing is going to squeeze that waveform, not totally, decimate and demolish the dynamics, but for the most part, get your track loud. And the thing about mastering is that you want to think of mastering as the final touch, the cherry on top. If you're going into mastering with a bad mixdown, it's going to be even worse. You're not going to be able to make much changes. It's going to be very, very frustrating. My mastering process will always differ between track to track. Sometimes I use SSL compression to glue things together. In this case, because it's an EDM track, I'm not using any SSL compression. I want it to be dynamic. I want it to have punch. I want to EQ the things that I want to take out, whether it be the very, very low end below 30 hertz or the very high end above 20 kilohertz. And let's get started. So here I have a equalizer. This one, you can of course use something like this. You can use a waves linear EQ, or you can experiment with their new mode, the natural phase. We can use that for reference too. So let's play back our track and make some changes. Let's go. For the most part, this track is okay. It was mixed fairly well. The colors of different tracks were pretty matching. They weren't too bad. What I would start doing, creating firstly I would create, let's see, high cut. Oops, wrong. My mistake. Low cut. So let's do a low cut. Okay, and you're gonna want something about. You can get very aggressive. You can do like a very steep curve, but just be mindful of the bass that you're taking out. So go ahead and solo that to hear it. What I like to do is I like to both listen to it and be mindful of the meters. We can see on the right there that it's going up -30, -20. That's really where we kick in, is around that 40 hertz. So actually here is not bad. I'll go ahead and leave it here, 29.9. That's fine. What that's going to do is it's going to create some space, more loudness, more punch for your existing bass. So don't think of it as, oh crap, I'm taking away from the entire thing. It's actually going to be beneficial when you use it smartly, like so. Let's go to the high end, and we're going to do a high cut. Again, a similar band. I'm going to start from 30,000 and work my way down. I'll leave it somewhere there, 20,000. Some people go more aggressive. I've seen Lazy Rich come down to the 18,000 range, 17, 18,000 range. So cool. So I'm happy with that. We got our basic low end and high end cut. Got that low cut and that high cut. So let's go ahead and close that. We won't need that for now. Next plugin that I would probably look at, if you're doing like a radio type of track, you might want to look at SSL Compression. SSL Compression, that's going to be another video. SSL Compression is a really cool tool that you can use to glue your track together in a very subtle way and really push the dynamics very well. So SSL Compression, excellent. I recommend it, but not for this genre in particular, because again, I want to pump the dynamics. I want dynamics shining out. I want the kicks and the snares to stand out. So let's go ahead and might add something like the isotope imager. So I'm going to add the imager here. Definitely I recommend this almost always with EDM to mono your bass, to mono your sub bass. And I would probably recommend anywhere from 150 and below, or you can do about 120 and below. So I'm going to leave it there. We can also check to see if there's phasing issues. Now, phasing issues are important, but you should be aware of them during your mix down, because phasing issues are going to introduce problems when you play it on, like in a club, and they just have mono channels. They don't have stereo speakers, or you're in a situation where you're playing back something and then you're like, hey, wait, I didn't hear the sound. The reason why it's going to be is 'cause it's out of phase. And you can see that. I really like their scope here. And so I just went ahead and made below 150 hertz fully mono. I'm gonna just play back to take a look at phasing. All right, so it's good. We got some nice width in there. That's what we want, because if it was out of phase, it's going to create problems. And I had a problem like that on one of my tracks. One of my old songs, the LMFAO Party Rock remix that I made, there were some sounds that were completely out of phase. And this one time, I was with my buddy, we were at this venue, and I was playing the song. And I'm like, wait, why is there empty space? And it was so funny because there was a kick in the bass line, and then you didn't even hear the bass line for a segment of the song. So be aware of that, be mindful of that. Again, that's going to be another video to go over. For mastering's sake, really just focus on making your subsonic bass mono. And you can experiment with this to turn on the stereo-wise and bump up slightly like your high-end channel. Sometimes I recommend something like that, maybe something very subtle, but I don't need to do that right now. I'm going to turn it off. So we're done with this plugin. So a recap, we just high passed and low passed around 30 hertz and 20 kilohertz. We made the sub bass mono. Let's go ahead and experiment with another plugin. I'm going to do the dynamics. I'm going to talk about dynamics here. So step one, I like to solo each band. And here at one point, compression is kicking in, and then I back off. So I'll give you an example. We're going to do the high-end band here, 2K to 10K. We're going to solo that. Bring the ratio all the way up and start bringing down the threshold to see when it kicks in. I think that's a pretty good threshold. Of course, we can adjust these, but I'm going to bring down the ratio. I would probably suggest something between 4 or lower. And with higher bands, I would recommend a faster attack. The reason being is that if you have really high-end sounds, snappy, crackles, cymbals, there's a lot going on in that high end. And having a high attack, maybe 10 ms or lower, is going to make sure that the compressor is snappy and tames all of that high end, so that there isn't a lot of harshness. All right, so let's move on to the next band. All right, so this one's going to be a bit different. This one has a, when we look at it as a whole, minus 15.7, minus 20. Probably will adjust these as a whole, but just getting kind of a idea, a reference point. Let's go to the mid. This is 140 hertz to 2K. Might even bring this up to maybe 150, or probably would recommend bumping this up to 150 or 200. I would probably listen to your kick to see where your kick shines the most. We'll just leave it there, 191. So let's go ahead and adjust this. I really like that around 13 value because it's cutting into the mix, but it's not crazy, so we'll leave it there. And finally, the low end. The low end is tricky. This is kind of a PSA. If you don't know how to compress the low end, leave it alone, because the worst thing that you could do, in my opinion, would be to compress the low end and you're left with a soulless track that is lacking drive in the low end and is lacking harmonics in the low end, and you don't want to crush that, you know, driving force, because the low end plays a big role in electronic music and giving energy in there. Of course, if you have other intended purposes, by all means go ahead, but I'll show you how gently we'll compress this. If anything, we might not even touch that band, so let's go ahead and take a look. Alright, so now that we got a very gentle compression, minus 9.7, very light ratio, a 10 ms attack to allow that transient to kick in, we will start adjusting gain manually. So let's go ahead and take a look at how much gain is being reduced by each band. So this one peaks from 0.1 to 0.4, so we'll put something like 0.2. We might bump it up a bit more, 0.3. Let's take a look at the other bands. This one again is from 0.9 to 1.4, so let's meet it somewhere in between. We might actually just leave it at 1. And again, this is just all to taste. Same thing with this one, I'm going to do 1.1. And probably the last band will be a 1.2 dB increase. Let's go ahead and do that. So now when we turn it on and off, there's very little difference actually. When we take a look at it as a whole, that's actually a really good example because we're not crushing the dynamics. It doesn't seem like there's a big difference between the compressed version and the original version. I do have my headphones at about 50%, so maybe as I crank it up I'll hear a more obvious change, but that's pretty good. I like that. Now let's move on. We can close this. What you can do too in a plugin like this too is you could hit link, this button link, And that link button is great because then you can drag a slider and you're moving all sliders at the same time to see where you want to perfect that sweet spot. And I'll give you an example. But it's okay there. I don't mind it at these settings. So let's go ahead and close that compressor. Move on to another plugin. So what I would probably take a look at would be maybe some what I would probably take a look at next would be maybe some harmonic excitation exciter. It's quite typical for people to use the tape, but of course you can experiment with different characteristics. I like the tape. We'll turn this on. It says here increases quality but requires more processing power. Sure. I mean, we're mastering at this point. We don't have other stuff, so we can afford the CPU usage. Now, of course, you can bump up other bands, but I don't recommend bumping up something like this, because imagine, this is pretty dangerous, because if you excite all of this band, it's a lot of information and it can overwhelm the listener. So usually what I do is just start with a very small amount in the high end. There we go, very subtle. Just added a tiny bit of shine, tiny bit of brightening. You can close that. And last but not least, you can put a limiter on there. Of course, use any type of limiter. Isotope does have their Ozone 7 maximizer. There's the vintage limiter. The vintage limiter might help you if you need a little bit of extra shine, a little bit of extra character in your track. And you're thinking, what can I do? What can give it that extra oomph? I'd say try out one of these limiters. Has different presets here. It says analog type-based response with thick vintage limiting. I like the analog and the modern. So let's try the modern. Not bad. So we got -7 threshold on there. This true peak limiting, this has always been a mystery to me, and I've read up on forums about it. At the end of the day, listen to your track. If it sounds better with or without it, you can leave it off, you can leave it on. And the ceiling is fine if it's at 0 dB. That will not be a problem, but if you want to be really, really concerned about not hitting that ceiling, then you can of course put at something like, you can see in the top left, it says ceiling -0.02. So you could do that if you really care about that. A free plugin that is great for monitoring would be something like the Voxengo Span. Not only does Voxengo Span allow you to see the loudness of your track in the RMS, and I'll show you what I mean. When we play back our track now, we can see the levels. We can compare it to another song. We see the RMS loudness of the song. Here we see we have a loudness of -9, at least in this area. Now it might be quieter overall, especially during the breaks, in the outros and whatnot. But that's good. That makes our song competitive. And of course you could drive this more, but that's where it's the kind of extra gain is not really worth it, because then you might really crush your song And I like this. I like it anywhere in there. I'm actually lately I've been really liking tracks that are like in -9 or 10 or 11 or 12. You don't have to go crazy spinning records like -8, -7, or lower, because then it's way too loud in my opinion. And when we take a look at this, it's actually pretty good. The levels are nice. We got our sub bass and our high end quite predominant there. So that's actually pretty good. That's pretty fast results that we got there. And of course, you're going to want to tweak it to your liking. And there's probably a lot more tweaking that I could be doing, especially with the compressor. But overall, these are pretty good results that we have. We'll go ahead and maybe bump this up a tad. We'll leave it at like -6.8. And let's go ahead and just listen to it one more time. Alright, cool. Hope you guys found this video useful. So I'm going to go over the steps. Just to recap, did use a EQ cutting the 20 around the 20 to 30 kilohertz, a very steep curve, as well as the 20 hertz with a steep curve and the 20 kilohertz. And next we use an imager to shape the low end and to just make it mono, 150 hertz and lower. You could do something like 120, anywhere in that range. Next we had the multiband compressor, as well as the exciter, and finally a limiter. And this is very basic, but I like keeping it simple. I don't like going insane and creating all these unnecessary effects chains, because in my opinion, I really love the work of deadmau5 and F Tampa, and they keep it minimal. They make the magic and make everything sound best with just a limiter. And I really advise that. If I give a solid recommendation, now sometimes you need inspirations musically, sound-wise, but anytime I work on a new project, I just have simply a limiter, and it's usually just a limiter that adds any extra characteristics, no extra gain, and I just crank up the volume for my monitoring. That way, your final song, your final project will bang harder, will sound better, and overall, yeah, if you implement these tips, hopefully you can get a better mix down, you can get a better mix, and yeah, hope you guys found this video useful. If you did like this video, give it a like. If you didn't like it, give it a dislike. Remember to share and comment. It helps a lot and helps me create more content, and it supports the work that I'm doing. So definitely let me know in the comments below what you guys thought about this technique for mastering. Just wanted to keep it short and sweet and allow you guys to kind of see a rundown of what I typically do in terms of EQ, imaging, dynamics, and limiting. And I'll see you guys in the next video.